Welcome back to Dragonfall. Apologies for the slightly abrupt cut, but I think this is going to be an in-depth conversation, and I don't want to stretch it out over a really long period. We're talking to Glory. Any thoughts about the last run? I have no strong feelings about the run one way or another. Or the other. Humanus is, of course, a horrible organization, but then so is every other target we've run against. To say that they deserved it would be redundant. She pauses for a moment to consider. That said, I admit that I do enjoy a certain sense of satisfaction thinking about Stahl's head breaking apart. So there's that. You said that things went bad when you turned 14. I'd like to keep talking about that. She stares at you, her face expressionless. No, I'd rather not. Why not? Because I don't see a reason to. The memories are unpleasant and dredging them up doesn't serve any real purpose. You're wrong about that. The last time we talked, it had an impact on you. That's reason enough to continue. She pauses a moment to consider your words, a troubled look on her face. I suppose that's true. Feeling discomfort is better than feeling nothing at all. Alright, here's the deal, Alice. I'm going to talk. You listen. When I'm done, I'm done. No complaints and no arguments. And we'll see what happens. Deal? Deal. Right. The 1,000-meter stare creeps back onto Glory's eyes. A moment later, she's locked away in her own head again, reliving memories that she'd long since filed away. So a few days after my 14th birthday, I began to express, magically. Judging from what I saw in your aura, your awakening must have been an incredible thing. It was actually fairly standard. The real power didn't come until later. We'll get to that. There's another long pause, and Glory becomes more animated. Anyway, I turned 14. I awakened. I don't even remember how my parents found out about it anymore. I think that my dad caught me playing with a tiny city spirit that I coaxed out of a pile of garbage, something like that. But everything that happened afterward, those days are kind of a blur. What I do remember is my father's response to the revelation that his little girl was a witch, a hex. He beat the living shit out of me with his fists, and then his belt, and then a claw hammer that he grabbed out of his toolbox. All the while, my mother was screaming and flailing at him. She took a couple of licks with the hammer, too. I mean, yes, I agree with this, but I don't think it's the right thing to say here. What about the neighbors? Didn't anyone call the Palazzi or Prosecuritas? Oh, sure they did. Our neighbors were perfectly decent people. Even if they couldn't admit it to themselves, they knew what my father was up to. When they heard a woman and a little girl screaming bloody murder, they were the first to pick up the comm. Unfortunately, police response times can leave a little something to be desired. I assume that they showed up eventually, but I'll never know. I was out of there well before anyone showed up to intervene. But we'll get to that in a second. So finally, after what felt like an hour, Dad stopped tuning me up with the hammer. I had broken ribs, a busted arm, and I couldn't see out of my left eye. My entire right side was covered with one giant bruise. I was bleeding all over the place, making a real mess of the carpet. The old bastard spat on me. His bleeding, crying daughter. He spat on me, and he told me that I was des Teufels Herr, the devil's whore. And he kicked me out of the house. As I was crawling away, my father told me that if he or any of his Kreuzritter brothers ever saw me again, they'd treat me as the Berlin chapter treats the enemies of God. If you're not familiar with how the Kreuzritters here in Berlin deal with heretics, it's decidedly less pretty than what my dad and his buddies did to their victims. I got the hint, and the next morning I hitched a ride out of Stuttgart. You were a human girl, presumably with an ID. Why didn't you go to a hospital? Oh, I did, but not in Stuttgart. If I went to a local hospital with the kind of injuries that Dad gave me, there'd be questions. I couldn't afford to stay in town any longer than I had to. Even if my dad wound up getting arrested for beating me, the rest of the local Kreuzritters would have found me, and I'd have wound up skinned alive and thrown into the Neckar. I wound up in Tübingen. I figured it'd be a safe enough place to find medical attention, maybe call home. It's not far from Stuttgart, but it has a huge student community that I figured I could blend into, and the university there has a decent magic department. My ride dropped me off at the university hospital, and they patched me up pretty good. Had some questions for me about how I got so beaten up, but I lied and told them I'd been mugged, which played nicely into my complete lack of cash, credit, and identification. Glory pauses for a moment and looks down at the floor, then fixes her eyes on you. She's visibly tense. We're going to fast forward through the next few years. I was a kid on the street, got by as best as I could, doing whatever I had to. The rest we can leave up to your imagination. Good? Of course. I only need to hear what you're comfortable talking about. Nothing more. Good. Glory's clenched jaw relaxes somewhat, and the tension drains out of her shoulders. Thanks. So anyway, I lived on the street for a few years. Got used to being hungry all the time. Got used to being rained on. Got by. I was painfully aware that I had magical talents, but without any kind of training or guidance, I didn't really know how to use or develop them. Truth be told, they scared me, so I more or less ignored them. So it sort of just went like that, till a few days after my 17th birthday. Then I met Marta, and everything changed. Marta was a sweet girl. First I took her for a street kid, like me. Her clothes were a little ratty, and she seemed comfortable being near me. But she also looked well-fed and happy, and those were two things I hadn't been in years. We started hanging out, and before I knew what was happening, I was in love. There was a genuine attraction between Marta and me, I think. But I also think that a lot of my affection for her came from the fact that she was the first person in years to give a damn about me. She cared, and I loved her for that. Glory pauses. She looks flustered, her composure cracked. Keep going, Glory. She stares at you for a beat, then nods. A few ragged breaths later, she continues. Marta told me about a place where she'd been hanging out. She invited me to join her there. It was called Fürststelle, the fireplace, and was sort of a commune for dispossessed youth. It turns out a lot of the street kids I'd known over the years had moved there. The way they'd disappeared, I'd assumed they'd been kidnapped or killed or had gone back to their parents. But there they were. I remember being kind of angry about it, like, how did everybody get the memo about this but me? Marta calmed me down. She was good at helping me work through my feelings, and I wound up following her to Fürststelle. To a street kid, it was basically paradise. The owner, a guy named Harrow, had set up this little farm just outside Tübingen in the Schönbusch forest. The Schönbusch is officially a nature park, but not many people go there nowadays. Too much fear of paranormal animals, I guess. Anyway, park or not, it was plenty big enough for us to hide in. It was also safe and pretty, and the farm was well stocked with food. Most importantly, First Stella gave us a sense of community and stability that we'd never had on the street, and we loved Harrow for that. He became like a surrogate father to us. Glory pauses again, and you recognize the distinctive flush in her cheeks. She seems to have come out of her reverie once again. That's enough for now. I need to process all of this, and I don't want to continue forward until I've had the chance to do that. I know this all happened years ago, but I guess it's still pretty raw to me. So I'm going to ask you to give me some space for a while. She turns away, and the frost begins to creep back into her voice. We can pick it back up later. Oh. It's pretty heavy. It's really well written. This game and this series has its ups and downs with the writing, but as far as just, you know, some solid dialogue prose there, nice job. It definitely hits pretty hard. Okay. There was something else. There was another option in the dialogue for us to talk to her, but maybe they both led to the same place. Alright, well, let's talk to everybody else now then. Let's see. You look down and see Play dead. Seems he doesn't know that one. Sit. He sits. Alright, anything else from Dietrich? Oh, here we go. Dietrich greets you with his familiar wry smile. Alice, what's new? I'm curious, Dietrich. Why did you switch from fronting a band to running the shadows? Honestly, working the stage was getting boring, boss. Spitting and screaming at the world was fine and good when I was a kid, but it just didn't do it for me anymore. The Dragon Slayer wanted me to fight a real enemy, so I left the band behind and I turned to the shadows. He shrugs. I don't know. Guess I figured that'd be the best way to find one. Considering current events, I'd say you're not wrong about that. Yeah, I guess not. Feels kind of daunting, truth be told, but it's exciting all the same. I've been looking for a worthy adversary for a while now. It's kind of satisfying having a white whale to chase. How long have you been looking for a real enemy? He shrugs. Not too long. Ever since I took the last one down the last one. The last one? Of course. I might be able to sit around feeling pleased with myself if I followed the Creator or the Moon Maiden, but the Dragon Slayer ain't that kind of idol. If I'm not drinking, I'm fighting, and if I'm not doing either of those things, I'm looking for a bigger, better fight to get in next time. Dietrich produces a flask from his jacket pocket and raises it in salute. It's a remarkably simple code to live by. Who was the last one? Gang boss. A great big orcish bastard called the Wildschwein. Led the local chapter of the Horde. I had my sights set on him and his for a while. They'd hurt a lot of people and I figured they'd pose a challenge. I wasn't wrong about that, but I took him out in the end. Dietrich, when does this pattern end? Well, boss, the way I figure it, it'll end when I pick a fight that I can't win. He smiles sadly. Might be this one. Maybe the next. It'll be hard to top a great dragon. But that's the way the Dragon Slayer wants it. And who am I to refuse him? Abruptly, he turns away. That's enough talk for today, boss. Besides, you've got other things to do, I'm sure. Well, I think there's one more dialogue option. Nope, he's done. Alright, well. What else? What else? What else? Blitz stubs out his cigarette at your approach. Alice, I was hoping I'd see you. Do you have another run lined up for us yet? I'm strapped for cash. Why the hell are you strapped for cash? With the amount of work we've been doing, you should be rolling in New Yen. What can I say, Chief? He tries on a thoroughly unconvincing smile, but immediately seems to think better of it. The anxious look returns to his face. I have expensive tastes. How expensive are we talking here? Even if you had a raging cram habit, I think you'd have at least some money left. Expensive. Truth be told, I'm in debt. In debt? To who? He hesitates before responding. When he does, his voice carries an edge of annoyance. No offense, but this is getting a little too personal, Chief. My debts are none of your business. If some bookie sends his thugs here looking for you, it's going to become my business. So talk. Now. Blitz shakes his head in exasperation. Alright, fine. First off, you don't need to worry about anyone coming after me. My debts are to a bunch of old contacts. If I don't pay them, I'm going to lose them. And in this line of work, it isn't smart to burn bridges. Second, before you ask, those debts are for services rendered. I was in a tight spot, I needed some help, and I threw around a lot of IOUs to get it. Third, and finally, the trouble I was in involved a girl. I'll tell you about it if you ask me to, but we're verging deep into personal feelings territory. So if you don't want to hear me sob over my ex-girlfriend, you'll drop the subject now. So it's up to you, Chief. You really want to go down this road? Or shall we keep this relationship professional? Well, we're going to make it personal, but we're going to do that in the next episode. See you guys then.